Hi, everyone. This is Tom Derry, CEO of ISM, with a video update on a second round of research we've produced and published related to the ongoing impact of the coronavirus outbreak on the global supply management system. In the first round of research, we found a couple of startling things. One was that lead times out of China had effectively doubled, and that corresponded with a 50% reduction in production out of China, both in terms of operations and staffing levels. Staffings were about 57%. And we're finding that continues in China. Despite what you may be hearing to the contrary, U.S. firms are reporting that their suppliers and their operations in China continue to operate in the 50% level or slightly higher, both in terms of operations. A little higher on staffing, maybe as high as 80%. So staffing is ramping up. We haven't seen that flow through yet necessarily into operations and output. So a slightly different take on what you may be hearing from other sources on the situation in China. What this survey found in this particular round of research was that we're beginning to see the supply effect or the supply shock ripple out from China into Europe as a second wave. The survey found that about 50% of production has been reduced in Europe now, and that is beginning to have an impact on supplies flowing from the EU into the United States, as reported by our respondents. And by the way, our respondents are about 55% manufacturing and 45% non-manufacturing, so representative of the entire economy as a whole. So we've seen these increases in lead times not necessarily go down. They're continuing to be about 2 times normal levels out of China, out of Korea, out of Japan, and we're seeing equivalent increases in lead times now being reported out of Europe. So that's really a ripple effect from the initial impact of the virus in China and mainland China itself now into some of the other significant export economies around the globe. In addition to the changes in lead times, we're seeing, not surprisingly, a change in our respondents' strategies with respect to inventories. Sometimes it's a proactive strategy, and sometimes they're actually a victim of circumstance. About 35% of firms are saying they're holding intentionally more inventory than normal. So they're anticipating supply disruption, maybe issues with having supply replenished later in the year, and they're holding more than normal. Now, that's not always an optimal output from a financial perspective, but in these times of uncertain supply, it would make sense why firms are holding on to higher levels of inventory where they can. However, on the flip side, about 25% of firms are holding less inventory than they normally would, as they report, which to me indicates the impact of the supply disruption. If 25% of firms would like to hold more inventory and are unable to find that and keep it in stock, that's an indication of how the inventory situation is developing here in the United States for U.S.-based firms that are part of our survey. Now, how are firms responding to these changes in conditions? So we've got both a supply disruption and some beginning to see some impact on demand in the United States. In fact, firms are reporting in the U.S. that demand is down on average between 5 and 6%, which is right in line, by the way, with recently released numbers on U.S. GDP, which was reported to decline at about 4.8% annually for the first quarter. So our demand reduction numbers are right in line with the official U.S. GDP numbers and corroborate that finding. So how are firms responding? Well, not surprisingly, they're adjusting headcount. 25% of firms say that headcount has been reduced and that other firms are either reducing hours or delaying hiring plans. So there will be a significant impact on the employment status of firms in the United States going forward. Again, we've seen that play out in the official unemployment statistics that have been coming out over the last several weeks, with some very high reported numbers of unemployment in the United States. Similarly, firms are forecasting a reduction in revenues, with more than 20% of firms forecasting formally a full year reduction in revenues at this point, which is up significantly from the number of firms in the first wave of research, and makes sense as firms begin to come to terms with the realities and the implications of both the supply shock and the corresponding reduction in demand in terms of U.S. demand, aggregate demand in the U.S. economy. And so seeing some reduction in revenues expected going forward into the remainder of 2020. That being said, firms are also reducing and offsetting some of their expenses in other areas, particularly CapEx. About 27% of firms have indicated they have planned to defer or delay or just cancel their planned investment in capital expenditures going forward, which makes sense in times when companies are very concerned about maintaining their cash levels, conserving their cash, and being prepared to respond to these difficult circumstances. Planned investment in capital equipment is going to be deferred, delayed, or postponed until the economic climate becomes more certain. And we're certainly seeing that play out in our results. When it comes to specific industry sectors, we're seeing a wide divergence of results. I've mentioned that, for instance, most firms are seeing decline in demand, which is fairly significant across the entire U.S. economy. But certain firms stand out for an increase in demand, or certain sectors, I should say. Maybe not surprisingly, now that we've seen some data flow through, food and beverage is reporting a significant uptick in demand, food and beverage manufacturing, that is. I saw some data this week that indicated that grocery sales are up 29% year over year. So our data is right in line with that, saying that there's a surge in demand for food and beverage items coming out of U.S. manufacturing. That doesn't surprise me at all, considering that we're not dining out and people are shopping and cooking at home, and that we're seeing that change in consumer consumption behavior. Similarly, we're seeing a pretty strong increase in demand, over 17%, for management consulting services. Again, this makes sense when you think about firms and their need for specific expertise and how to deal with a scope that is, or rather a pandemic that is unprecedented in both scope and scale. And these are times that most firms have never encountered before. And so getting the best thinking available on how to deal with both the economic crisis and the health crisis puts expertise from management consulting firms at a real premium. So we're seeing an increase in demand there. Again, not surprisingly, we're seeing a massive spike in demand in healthcare and social assistance, which is the industry sector that contains all of our hospitals and healthcare systems, all of our urgent clinics and similar facilities. A 50% increase in demand across all of that sector, which is a massive spike. And firms, as you know, hospitals and healthcare systems are responding by postponing elective surgeries. In fact, they're under government mandate in many cases in many states to postpone elective surgeries and prepare for a surge of dealing with COVID-19 patients. Now, as a result of the postponing of elective surgeries, we're seeing another negative impact on the healthcare sector, which is a decline in revenues of about 30%. So this is coupled with a surge in demand of 50%. That's a very difficult place for our hospitals and healthcare systems to be. An increase in demand of 50%, a corresponding reduction in revenues of about 30%. Now, we've seen legislation come from Congress in the last couple of weeks allocating some additional funding for hospitals and healthcare systems to help them through the crisis, and it remains to be seen whether that will be beneficial in helping them respond to providing the critical healthcare that we all need in this time of crisis and enabling them to continue to survive and be there to provide for our needs as we go forward. All of the details around the research are available on the ISM Coronavirus Resources page, which is available on the ISM website. I encourage you to go there and look at the specific implications for your industry sector and maybe for your company at instituteforsupplymanagement.org. Thanks, everyone. Be safe, stay well.